The latest in the Rob Reiner murder, the horrific double murder in which the couple's son, Nick, is in custody. This time yesterday, bail had been set at $4 million, and we criticized that on this show, saying that's not going to do it. And sure enough, bail was revoked. There is no bail set for him. He needs to remain in custody. Where now they are reporting, TMZ, that he is on suicide watch and in an administrative segregation, they call it, at Twin Towers Correctional Facility in L.A., the night before his parents were murdered, Saturday night this past, Nick got into a very loud argument with his father at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party. The shouting match was loud enough that many others could hear it. That Rob and his wife's mother, Michelle, then left the party. We do not know if Nick left with them, reports TMZ. A source at the party told us Nick...
Some tragedies don't happen overnight. They grow quietly, slowly, over years, until one moment changes everything forever. This is one of those stories. When the shocking news broke that Nick Reiner had been taken into custody for allegedly killing his own parents, the public froze in disbelief. There were no dramatic outbursts, no emotional breakdowns. Nick appeared eerily calm, denying every accusation with a blank expression, as if the case had nothing to do with him at all. For 2 weeks, investigators waited for a confession, but Nick remained silent. Then, inside a cold interrogation room, everything changed. The moment detectives placed the crime scene photos in front of him, his composure shattered. Nick collapsed into uncontrollable sobs, the kind of cry that sounds like something deep inside has finally broken. From that moment on, an unsettling truth began to surface. This tragedy did not begin on that night. It had been building for decades. Nick's childhood was marked by a deep sense of emotional isolation. He wasn't abused or neglected in obvious ways, but he felt invisible inside his own home. As he grew older, that loneliness hardened into resentment and eventually into addiction. Drugs became his escape from a mind that never felt quiet. Rehab followed again and again. Each time brought hope, and each relapse brought deeper disappointment. While the world saw Rob Reiner as a loving, successful father, Nick felt like an outsider watching his own family from a distance. Nick later described it perfectly. "The door was always open," he said, "but I never had the key." Living under the shadow of Rob Reiner and legendary grandfather Carl Reiner made him feel like a failed version of greatness. The pressure crushed him. In his teenage years and early adulthood, Nick drifted from state to state, chasing relief he never found. Still, his parents never gave up. They kept calling. They kept checking in. They kept believing love would be enough to save him. For a while, it almost was. In 2015, Nick and Rob worked together on Being Charlie, a film centered on addiction. It gave Nick structure, purpose, and stability. For the first time in years, people around the family believed he was finally turning a corner. But addiction doesn't disappear quietly. The relapse came slowly, then all at once. By mid-2025, Nick returned home exhausted, not healed, the house filled with tension, sleepless nights, fear disguised as concern, love mixed with anxiety. Then came December 13th, 2025, the night of Conan O'Brien's Christmas party. Nick went with his parents, hoping the crowd and noise would quiet the chaos in his head. Instead, it made him feel even more alone. Laughter surrounded him, but he felt invisible. His father watched him closely, too closely. "You're always looking at me like I'm about to do something terrible," Nick whispered. Rob answered quietly, "Because I'm afraid." That sentence cut deeper than any argument ever could. Nick left the party early, overwhelmed by a feeling he couldn't name. Later, he would say it wasn't about that night alone. It was about years of exhaustion finally spilling over. The party was just where it surfaced. When Nick returned home, the anger didn't explode. It froze. Alone in the silent house, surrounded by family photos and awards, his thoughts spiraled out of control. The noise in his head became unbearable. "If the pain won't stop," he whispered, "then I'll make it stop." What happened next would destroy everything. Nick picked up a kitchen knife, the same one once used for family dinners, and walked into his parents' bedroom. For a moment, he hesitated. He cried, he apologized, then something inside him snapped. Moments later, the house fell into silence. Nick fled, driving aimlessly before ending up alone in a seaside hotel. On the outside, he appeared calm. On the inside, he was completely hollow. "I just wanted everything to stop," he later said. "But now it's worse than ever." There was no break-in, no unknown suspect. The truth was devastatingly clear. The following day, Nick's sister discovered the scene and called authorities. Investigators confirmed multiple close-range wounds, personal, prolonged, and brutal. Within 24 hours, Nick Reiner was charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide. Prosecutors added special circumstances, meaning he now faces life in prison or potentially the death penalty. On December 17, 2025, Nick appeared in court for the first time. He showed no emotion. When asked if he understood the charges, he answered with just 3 words, "Yes, Your Honor." Since then, the Reiner family has withdrawn from public view. A private memorial honored Rob and Michelle not as Hollywood icons, but as parents, partners, and people who loved fiercely until the very end. Nick's confession brought no peace. His punishment began long before any sentence inside his own mind. And now, one haunting question remains. Is Nick Reiner a calculated killer or a lost soul crushed by addiction, expectation, and untreated emotional wounds? As the case moved forward, public reaction became sharply divided. Some saw Nick Reiner as a monster who committed the ultimate betrayal. Others saw a deeply broken man whose mind had been unraveling for years. Social media exploded with debates, hot takes, and emotional arguments, but none of them could fully capture the quiet horror of what had actually happened inside that home. Mental health experts began weighing in, carefully dissecting Nick's history of addiction, depression, and emotional detachment. They pointed out that long-term substance abuse can fundamentally alter how the brain processes fear, empathy, and impulse control. Over time, reality itself can become distorted. Thoughts don't flow normally. Emotions don't respond proportionally. Everything becomes louder, darker, and harder to escape. Investigators reviewing Nick's past uncovered a pattern that felt tragically familiar. Moments of clarity followed by collapse. Periods of hope immediately chased by relapse. Each time he fell, the climb back up became steeper. Each failure reinforced his belief that he was beyond repair. And that belief, once rooted deeply enough, became dangerous. Friends of the family later shared that Rob and Michelle lived in a constant state of emotional contradiction. They were proud of Nick. They were terrified for him. They believed in him. They feared losing him. Loving someone struggling with addiction meant living in permanent uncertainty, never knowing if today would be calm or catastrophic. Rob Reiner, in particular, carried a heavy burden. Publicly, he was known as a confident filmmaker, a man who shaped stories with precision and heart. Privately, he struggled with the role he couldn't control, the role of a father watching his child slowly disappear. No script could fix that. No success could shield him from it. Michelle Reiner was described by those close to her as the emotional anchor of the family. She listened more than she spoke. She worried constantly, but tried not to show it. Friends recalled how her voice softened whenever Nick's name came up, as if saying it too firmly might somehow push him further away. In the weeks after the arrest, prosecutors emphasized one critical point. Regardless of Nick's mental health struggles, the act itself was deliberate and sustained. This was not a single impulsive moment. The number and nature of the wounds suggested prolonged violence, and in the eyes of the law, that mattered deeply. The defense, however, prepared a very different narrative. They argued that Nick's mental state at the time of the crime was severely compromised. That years of addiction, emotional isolation, and untreated psychological damage had culminated in a complete mental collapse. They insisted this was not calculated evil, but catastrophic dysfunction. Inside the detention facility, Nick reportedly spent long periods in isolation. Guards described him as quiet, compliant, and emotionally distant. He followed instructions. He spoke politely, but he rarely spoke about his parents unless prompted, and when he did, his voice reportedly cracked under the weight of guilt. According to sources close to the investigation, Nick asked repeatedly if he could write letters. Not for release, not for sympathy, just to say he was sorry. Whether those letters will ever be read remains unknown. Psychologists reviewing the case noted something chilling. In extreme psychological distress, the mind can reframe violence as relief. Not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. The desire isn't to cause pain, it's to make pain stop. And when that line blurs, consequences become irreversible. As the legal process continued, the media revisited old interviews, old photos, old red carpet moments. Smiling family pictures now felt haunting. Clips of laughter were replayed with new context. What once looked like happiness now raised painful questions about what was happening behind closed doors. One recurring question refused to go away. Could this have been prevented? Some argued that more aggressive intervention was needed. Others said the family did everything possible. Rehab, support, unconditional love. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, a painful reminder that not every tragedy has a clear point where it could have been stopped. Addiction doesn't just affect the person using. It reshapes entire families. It creates cycles of hope and disappointment that exhaust everyone involved. Over time, even love can become strained under the weight of fear. For Nick, that fear eventually turned inward. He believed he was a burden, that his presence caused pain, that the people he loved would be better off without him. And that belief, once fully formed, became lethal. Legal experts predict the trial will focus heavily on Nick's mental capacity at the time of the crime. Was he capable of understanding the consequences? Did he act with intent? Or was he operating under a distorted reality shaped by years of psychological damage? California law allows little room for ambiguity in cases involving multiple victims. The stakes could not be higher. Life without parole, or worse, remains a real possibility. As the next court date approaches, the silence around the Reiner family has grown even deeper. Friends say the grief is immeasurable. There is no way to mourn parents without also mourning the son they lost in a different way. Because in many ways, this tragedy claimed 3 lives that night. Nick Reiner will never again be the person he was before. No verdict can restore what was destroyed. No sentence can undo the final moments in that bedroom, and no explanation will ever fully make sense of it all. This case forces an uncomfortable truth into the spotlight. Love, fame, money, and opportunity are not guarantees of safety. Mental illness and addiction do not discriminate. And sometimes, even when people do everything they can, the outcome is still unbearable. As viewers, it's easy to look for villains and victims, to simplify a story this complex into something easier to digest. But real life rarely offers clean answers. Sometimes it only offers lessons, paid for at an unimaginable cost. The story of Nick Reiner is not just about crime, it's about silence, about emotional distance, about untreated pain passed quietly through years until it reaches a breaking point. And as this case continues to unfold, one question lingers heavier than all the rest. When someone is clearly drowning, how do we know when love is no longer enough, and when help must become something more? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As the days passed, new details continued to emerge, each one adding another layer of heartbreak. Investigators confirmed there were no signs of struggle elsewhere in the home. No forced entry, no defensive chaos. Everything pointed to a deeply personal act carried out by someone who knew the house, the routines, and the people inside it intimately. That realization alone shifted the narrative from shock to sorrow. Former friends of Nick began speaking anonymously, describing a man who had always felt out of sync with the world around him. They recalled moments where Nick seemed present physically, but absent emotionally, as if he were constantly fighting thoughts no one else could hear. Some remembered him as kind and introspective. Others remembered sudden mood shifts that came without warning. Several people mentioned the same haunting pattern. Nick didn't lash out at others randomly. His anger turned inward. He blamed himself for everything, for not living up to expectations, for disappointing his parents, for being the problem no one could fix. Over time, that self-hatred became the loudest voice in his head. Mental health professionals, following the case, explained that this kind of internalized despair can be more dangerous than outward rage. When someone believes they are the source of pain, they may come to believe that removing themselves or destroying the situation entirely is the only solution. Logic fades. Consequences blur. Emotion takes over completely. Inside the legal system, preparations intensified. Prosecutors focused on timelines, forensic consistency, and the sustained nature of the attack. They argued that even if Nick was emotionally distressed, the length and repetition of the act demonstrated awareness and intent. To them, this wasn't confusion. It was control. The defense team countered with medical records, rehab histories, and expert evaluations. They painted a picture of a man whose brain chemistry and emotional regulation had been compromised for years. A man who did not wake up that morning intending to kill, but whose mind collapsed under accumulated pressure. As these two narratives formed, the public struggled to reconcile them. How could someone raised with privilege, opportunity, and support still end up here? The uncomfortable answer was simple and terrifying. Pain does not follow logic. It follows perception. Behind the scenes, extended family members were left grappling with impossible grief. Not only had they lost Rob and Michelle, but they were also forced to confront the reality that the person responsible was someone they loved. There was no clean way to mourn, no clear direction for anger. Friends of Rob Reiner shared stories of his devotion as a father, moments that now felt almost unbearable to recall. Late-night phone calls, quiet check-ins, endless patience. He never stopped believing Nick could recover. That belief, while rooted in love, became part of the tragedy itself. Michelle's absence was felt in a different way. She had been the emotional glue, the quiet protector, the one who smoothed over rough edges when tension rose. Without her, the home felt emptier even before that final night. Those who knew her say she carried worry like a second heartbeat. In the detention facility, Nick's mental evaluations continued. Doctors noted deep remorse paired with emotional numbness. He reportedly struggled to articulate how the situation escalated, often repeating the same phrase. "I didn't see another way." To clinicians, that sentence spoke volumes. Night after night, Nick was said to replay memories in fragments. The party, the drive home, the kitchen, the bedroom doorway. These moments returned not as clear scenes, but as flashes, sounds, expressions, unfinished sentences. Trauma doesn't play in order. It crashes all at once. One evaluator noted that Nick's greatest torment wasn't fear of punishment. It was awareness. Awareness of what he had done. Awareness that no apology could reach its destination. Awareness that the people he loved most were gone by his own hand. As the media coverage intensified, a troubling pattern emerged. Some viewers began romanticizing the tragedy. Others turned it into content. Clips were shared. Headlines were exaggerated. The humanity of the situation risked being lost beneath spectacle. As the legal process slowly unfolded, one reality became impossible to ignore. This was not a case that would ever feel finished. No verdict, no sentence, no explanation could truly close the wound left behind. For everyone involved, the story had already passed the point where justice alone could bring peace. In the months following Nick's arrest, mental health advocates began using the case as an example of how addiction and emotional isolation can silently escalate. They emphasized that many people struggling at Nick's level don't outwardly appear dangerous. They may seem calm, reflective, even polite, until the internal pressure becomes unbearable. One psychiatrist commenting on the case described it as a long-term implosion rather than a sudden explosion. According to experts, when emotional pain goes unprocessed for years, the mind can begin to distort reality itself. Feelings of worthlessness grow. Guilt mutates into self-hatred, and eventually the brain looks for any way, healthy or not, to make the noise stop. Nick's history revealed warning signs that, in hindsight, seemed painfully clear. Persistent relapse, increasing emotional withdrawal, a deep fixation on being a disappointment, repeated statements suggesting he felt beyond repair. Each sign alone might not have predicted violence. Together, they formed a dangerous pattern. Still, those closest to Nick struggled with guilt of their own. Friends and extended family asked themselves questions that had no satisfying answers. Should they have pushed harder, intervened differently, set firmer boundaries, or was there truly nothing more that could have been done? This is one of the hardest realities of loving someone with addiction. The line between support and enabling is thin, unclear, and constantly shifting. Every decision feels heavy. Every outcome feels like a potential failure. Inside the courtroom, these emotional complexities were reduced to legal definitions. Intent, capacity, responsibility. The law demands clarity, even when human behavior offers none. Prosecutors focused on evidence that showed awareness and physical control. The defense focused on psychological collapse and impaired judgment. Both sides were right in different ways, and that's what made the case so disturbing. Nick was not unconscious. He was not unaware. But was he truly in control of himself? That question sat at the center of everything. During closed-door evaluations, Nick reportedly expressed a recurring thought that haunted him. He believed that his presence caused harm, that wherever he went, pain followed. In his distorted state, removing himself or destroying the source of that pain felt like a solution rather than an act of violence. Experts call this catastrophic reasoning, a condition where the mind convinces itself that extreme action is the only way forward. It is not logical, it is not rational, but in the moment, it feels inevitable. As the public continued to dissect the story, another uncomfortable truth surfaced. Fame didn't protect this family, wealth didn't save them, access to resources didn't guarantee healing. If anything, the pressure of legacy may have made it harder to admit how bad things truly were. Nick didn't just feel like he failed himself. He felt like he failed a name, one known by millions. That kind of pressure doesn't excuse what happened, but it adds context. And context matters when we're trying to understand, not justify, an irreversible act. Meanwhile, the Reiner home, once filled with conversations, laughter, and routine, stood silent. Neighbors described an eerie stillness around the property, lights off, curtains drawn. A physical reminder that life does not return to normal after something like this. Friends who had visited the home over the years said it was never a place of fear. It was warm, familiar, loving. That contrast made the tragedy even harder to process. Violence is easier to explain when it comes from chaos, much harder when it comes from a place that once felt safe. Nick's sister, Raimi, remained out of the spotlight, but sources close to the family described her grief as layered and complex. She mourned her parents deeply, and at the same time, she mourned the brother she lost long before that night. For her, and for many families affected by addiction, loss doesn't happen once. It happens again and again, in stages. As the next hearing date approached, speculation intensified around whether prosecutors would pursue the harshest possible sentence. Some argued that the brutality of the act left no room for leniency. Others warned that ignoring Nick's mental health history would send the wrong message about how society handles psychological collapse. This debate extended beyond the courtroom. It reached lawmakers, clinicians, and advocacy groups. What does accountability look like when illness and intent overlap? Where does punishment end and responsibility begin? There are no easy answers. Nick's defense team signaled that they would not deny the act itself. Instead, they planned to focus on Nick's mental deterioration, hoping the court would consider long-term psychiatric confinement rather than pure punishment. Whether the system is capable of handling that nuance remains uncertain. As time passed, Nick reportedly became quieter, more withdrawn. The shock had faded. The adrenaline was gone. What remained was a heavy, unrelenting awareness of reality. Guards described moments where he would sit motionless for hours, staring at nothing. Remorse, in cases like this, does not come with relief. It comes with weight. One clinician involved in the evaluations reportedly said, "He understands now. That's the tragedy. Understanding came too late." That statement alone captures the unbearable cruelty of the situation. Understanding didn't save his parents. Understanding didn't save him. It only ensured he would live with the knowledge forever. As this story continues to develop, it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we view mental illness, about how often we mistake quiet suffering for stability, about how easily warning signs are dismissed because they don't fit the image we expect. Nick Reiner's story is not meant to inspire sympathy or outrage alone. It is meant to force reflection. How many people are quietly unraveling right now? How many families are living in fear they don't talk about? And how many tragedies are forming slowly, behind closed doors, unnoticed? This case reminds us that prevention doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like persistent follow-up. Sometimes it looks like boundaries enforced earlier. And sometimes, tragically, it looks like recognizing that love alone cannot replace professional intervention. As Forever Fame TV continues to follow this case, our focus remains on telling the story responsibly, not sensationally, because real lives were lost, and real pain remains. If there is any way to honor Rob and Michelle Reiner, it may be by taking mental health seriously, not just when it becomes newsworthy, but long before it reaches a breaking point. And if there is any lesson in Nick's downfall, it is this: untreated pain does not disappear. It waits. This story is not over. The court will decide Nick's legal fate, but the emotional consequences will echo far beyond any sentence. We will continue to follow this case closely, thoughtfully, and with care. As the case continues to move through the justice system, one thing has become painfully clear. There is no version of this story with a clean ending. No ruling will undo the damage. No sentence will restore what was lost. What remains is reflection, quiet, uncomfortable, and necessary, For many watching from the outside, this case has become a mirror. It forces people to confront how society responds to long-term mental illness, especially when it exists inside families that appear strong, loving, and successful. Too often, suffering is dismissed simply because it doesn't match expectations. Nick Reiner didn't fit the stereotype of someone capable of extreme violence. He wasn't loud. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't openly aggressive. He was withdrawn, exhausted, and drowning in thoughts he didn't know how to explain. That's what makes this case so unsettling. The danger didn't arrive screaming. It arrived silently. Experts say that silence is often the most overlooked warning sign. When someone stops asking for help, stops reacting, stops fighting, it doesn't always mean they're healing. Sometimes, it means they've given up internally. And that internal surrender can be far more dangerous than outward chaos. In the aftermath, conversations around intervention have grown louder. Families struggling with similar situations are asking difficult questions. When is love no longer enough? When does protecting someone mean protecting others as well? And how do you make those decisions without destroying relationships in the process? There is no guidebook for situations like this. Every choice feels wrong in some way. Act too harshly, and you risk pushing someone further away. Act too gently, and you may fail to stop a crisis from forming. The Reiner family lived inside that impossible balance for years. Nick's story also challenges the way we talk about accountability. Acknowledging mental illness does not erase responsibility, but ignoring it doesn't bring justice either. The truth exists in a painful middle space, one that the legal system often struggles to navigate. As the next hearing approaches, the public waits for answers the court may never fully provide. Will the sentence focus solely on punishment, or will it reflect the long psychological collapse that led to this moment? Whatever the outcome, it will spark debate far beyond the single case. For now, the Reiner name carries both legacy and loss. A reminder that talent, success, and love cannot always shield a family from tragedy. Sometimes, the deepest struggles exist alongside the brightest achievements. This story asks something of all of us, not judgment but awareness. To listen more closely, to take emotional withdrawal seriously, to recognize that untreated pain doesn't fade with time, it intensifies. If there is any meaning to be found in this heartbreak, it may be in prevention, in speaking sooner, in intervening earlier, in refusing to let silence be mistaken for strength. Let us know what you think justice should look like in a case this heartbreaking. This is Forever Fame TV. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you in the next one.